I don't really know how to start this video because if I'm going to explain to you Kamala Harris' economic plan that she's actually moving forward, you will be actually furious because this is not a plan to move the United States forward, but rather this is a plan to literally destroy the US economy. I'm not here trying to dramatize anything here, but rather I will explain to you everything one by one. In fact, I will not be pessimistic with this plan. What I'm going to do in this video basically is that this is what Kamala Harris told us she will do with the economy, and these are the consequences that it will have on the economy. And then you are going to decide on your own whether that is a good thing or a bad thing. I will try my best not to include any kind of personal opinions, but literally just show you all the facts on the ground. Because what politicians usually do is that they will throw all of this ambitious plan, they will actually start shouting these very nice words out there. But if you actually think about it from the logical perspective and think about the consequences of those policies, then you will understand what kind of an impact they will actually have on the economy. And that's exactly what we will do here. So let's take a look at the Kamala Harris economic plan right here. So if you actually take a look at your plan, it includes a lot of things, but we can't really cover every single thing. And a lot of these things will have an impact on the economy, but they will not have any kind of substantial impact on the economy. So we are not going to talk about them. For example, she wants to increase the tax credits for people who are going to give birth to children. Will that have an impact on the economy? Yes, of course. But just raising that tax credit isn't going to have a massive influence on the economy. So what we'll do over here is that we'll just take a look at the main policies that she actually proposed. And that's exactly what we'll do. The first most important thing that Kamala Harris talked about, and this is an important issue to literally every single voter out there, are the taxes. So taxes play an important role because taxes are, you can say, taxes are literally the main source of the income for the government. And we have to take a look what exactly Harris wants to actually take all of those money in order to support whatever she's actually claiming. Now, the first thing that she said she's going to do is that she wants to kind of tax unrealized gains. A 25% tax on unrealized gains on people with a net worth of $100 million. Now, at first glance, it sounds like a great idea. Finally, we are going to tax the rich. Finally, we are going to tax the top 1%. But if you actually literally take a moment and think about that and think about what it really means, you will be amazed. So let's ask ourselves a very simple question. What exactly is unrealized gains? What is a tax on unrealized capital? So whenever you actually go and invest in the stock market, for example, you buy a stock, let's say for $1,000. And then you wait a year and let's say that your Apple stocks that you purchased $1,000 to buy them have increased by 40%. Just a hypothetical example for you to understand. So now you have made a capital gain of 40%. Your $1,000 now worth $1,400. Now that's just on paper. You haven't cashed out that money yet. You don't have that money on the pocket. Yes, if you kind of pull out your Robinhood app and you will see that, oh, your $1,000 right now worth $1,400. But do you have that money in your pocket? Absolutely not. And that's what we call in the world of finance unrealized gains. So if I would ask you to pay taxes on those extra 40% that you have made from Apple stock or the extra $400, well, you can't really pay taxes on that. You haven't made the money. What could potentially happen is that the year after that, let's say it's a market crash and your Apple stock that was up, let's say, for example, by 40% last year, this year it's down by 20%. Suddenly, on paper, you made a loss. What happens now? You actually pay taxes on those $400, the money that you didn't actually make in the first place. So that is, if you think about it, is a disaster because a lot of people make money in the stock market on paper, but that money doesn't actualizes into real money. Take another example. Let's say you go out there and you start a company and you start a startup. A team of people start a really brilliant startup. And on paper, your company starts rising dramatically fast. You get a lot of users, you get a lot of investments, but all you do is that with all of that investments is that you put it back into the company and the company starts growing. Now on paper, your company is worth $1 billion and your 20% stake in the company makes you a $200 millionaire. So you have $200 million worth of assets, worth of company assets. And now ask yourself a very simple question. Do you have that money in your pocket? Well, absolutely not. You don't make that much money unless you take all of those stocks and you sell all of those stocks. But if you do that, your company is going to collapse. But under this plan, you actually made that money and you have to pay taxes on that money, even though that you don't actually have the cash. So this plan, that is the tax on unrealized gains, is an absolute disaster for the economy because nobody is going to invest in the US stock market understanding that they're going to be taxed on money that they haven't made in the first place. Right now, we only pay taxes when we have realized gains, which means that I've actually purchased the stock, let's say in 2018, and now in 2024, I have sold my stocks. So whatever real profit I have actually made, I'm going to pay taxes on that. But if the market one year went up and the second year it went down, then I'm not paying taxes on those years because I haven't actually made the real money. That money was just made on paper and nobody actually profited from that. So ask yourself a very simple question. Who would actually invest in the US stock market knowing that they will be paying taxes on things, on the money that they haven't made in the first place? So I will leave that for you to decide. The next thing that Kamala Harris wants to tax is that she wants to increase long-term capital gain tax to almost 40%. Now, if you're not an investor in the stock market, this might not really tell you a lot of things. But in reality, if something like this is done, it's basically a disaster. And now I'm going to tell you why. When you're buying stocks in the stock market, for example, there are two types of taxes. If I'm going to buy a stock today, and I'm going to instantly sell it, I will pay an almost 40% tax. It's probably like 37%, something like that, which is a lot. So if you're a day trader, you actually pay a lot of taxes. It's like a full-time job. If I'm going to buy a stock this week and sell it next week, I'm still going to pay that much taxes. The only case, if I'm going to take that stock and I'm going to hold it for longer than 12 months or a year, then I'm paying a much lower tax, depends on my tax bracket, anything from 0% up to 20% at best. And that is made basically for one simple reason, is that the longer you stay in the market, the less taxes you're going to pay. And that incentivizes people to be long-term investors in the US stock market. But now if you actually take that incentive, people no longer want to stay long in the US stock market. They will be instantly selling their stocks the moment they make any kind of profit. And that will actually drain the US stock market. We had this incentive in the first place to let most people, the rest of the world, to actually keep being investors in the US stock market. So changing this habit, changing this policy for now and letting people to actually pay taxes even though that they're actually staying in the stock market for such a long period of time, will take that incentive in the first place. So do you think that is a good idea, like driving people away from the US stock market? Now, the third tax policy she's actually proposing is that corporate tax, increase it to 28%. Now, this is great. I don't have any problem with that. Right now, it's 21%. If we raise it to 28%, that will add an additional probably anything between $80 to $120 billion to the US budget. It's not really going to make a huge difference because the US budget is right now over $6 trillion and we are running a deficit of $1.7 trillion. An extra $100 billion will actually cover some costs, but it won't really make a huge difference. But nonetheless, it's really not really a bad idea. So I don't have any problem with that. But these two policies that they're actually proposing to do will lead to some catastrophic results to the US stock market and the economy overall. Because if we destroy the US stock market, we're destroying US companies. And if we destroy US companies, there are going to be less jobs, there are going to be less opportunities, and that will just lead to the crash of the entire economy. Anyways, I will leave that for you to decide. The next thing that she's actually proposing to do to the economy is that she wants to do something called price gouging. Now, price gouging is basically price control. I don't really know why exactly they call it like that. I guess it just doesn't sound as bad as price control. Because price control is terrible for any economy. And I don't care what kind of economy is that. Whether that is the United States, China, Venezuela, or any other country. Because if you take a look at it from the historical perspective, you will realize that there isn't a single case probably in the entire history of humanity, or let's say in the entire history of economics, that some country imposed price caps and price controls and it succeeded. And there is a very good reason behind it. Even if you take a look at the history of the United States, there has been attempts to actually control prices and it has failed catastrophically. And I don't really know why no one is actually telling the Kamala Harris campaign that that is a really bad policy to actually conduct, why there aren't economists who are actually pointing out to that problem. And I'm not here trying to trash talk anybody here. I'm just going to give you very real examples why it doesn't work. So back in 1970s, the United States government imposed a price cap or a price control on oil. Guess what happened? So imagine, for example, you are supplying the United States with oil. You have an oil company, and the cost of getting that oil, let's say $1.5 per gallon to the market. Now, this is a hypothetical example. And then you sell it for $2 and you're making a 50-cent profit for each gallon that you're actually selling. Now, the government is going to tell you that, listen, you cannot sell your oil for more than $1.5 per gallon. What do you think is going to happen? If selling it more than that is illegal, you'll suddenly stop doing business. I mean, why would you waste your time? Why would you waste your effort? Why would you go through so much stress in order just to supply people with oil and you're not going to get any profit out of it? Will that actually make sense to you? Well, absolutely not. You might say, oh, that is the moral thing to do. Well, if that's the moral thing to do, why don't you go and do it? Why do you complain about these corporations? You want to sit down there in your house, in your couch, and you want that somebody to take all of that stress and effort and time to deliver you the gasoline. In return, they will not be making any kind of profits. And that's why it never works. Now, I'm going to give you another example. You might say that, well, we are not putting price caps on gasoline. We'll put price caps on medicine or grocery products. Well, that is right now is practiced in Venezuela. Venezuela right now is it's probably a failed state at this point, and it's actually running through so many economic troubles that I can't really cover in this video. But anyways, Venezuela is a failed state. And guess what they have done? Inflation has been getting out of control and prices started rising dramatically. And the government is like, wait a second, why don't we just put a price cap or a price control on food? Why don't we just put a price control, a price set on the basic essential products so that people can afford them? Guess what happened? They're so smart, right? They're as smart as people, as the politicians in the United States. They're acting or behaving as if nobody in the entire history of the world thought about that in the past. Let me tell you something. People thought about that in the past, they tried it in the past, and it failed every single time. Because if there are no incentives for people to deliver those foods in the first place, unless it's the government itself and the government is subsidizing it with some kind of oil money or any kind of taxation money, for example, individuals won't actually risk their lives doing so much business just to end up not making any kind of profit in the first place. So you can't really put price tags or price caps, I would say, in this case. And that's why if you take a look at what's happening in a country like Venezuela, there is a shortage of food, there is a shortage of medicine, and all because it's illegal to sell them above certain prices. Now, a third example I can give you are the rents in New York, for example. If you have ever been to New York, you know that there are a lot of houses or apartments, I would say, that nobody is renovating. When you have a price control, for example, on rents, then the landlords don't have any kind of motivation to actually improve those houses in the first place. I mean, why would I actually waste my money to renovate these houses if I can't after that rent it for a higher price? Now I can actually renovate my house for my tenants if I actually can charge them a higher price after renovating them. There's always should be an incentive for me to do anything like that. And that's why price controls never actually work. And there is a very simple equilibrium that actually, I mean, if you actually take an economics 101, you know what this equilibrium is. On one side, we have something called demand, and the other side, we have actually called supply. So we have demand and supply. And if you want to supply the market with something, for example, at this point, let's say it's here like what, 5, let's call it. Let me change the color and let me try to explain it in this way. So at this point, we have I don't like this as well. Let's change So if you actually take a look at this example, we have the equilibrium here is 5. So the quantity is 5 and the price is going to be 5. If we actually put, let's say, a price tag and it's impossible to sell it for more than $2 at this point, what happens is that there aren't going to be enough suppliers to supply the market. So suddenly there is going to be a market inefficiency and there is going to be a shortage of that product in this point because there aren't enough people to actually supply the market because they're not going to make any kind of money here. And that's why usually what happens in a free and fair market, in a free economy, let's say, or in a capitalistic economy, is that we just let the market to do its job. If suppliers, for example, can raise the prices and it makes economic sense for them, they will actually sell it at this price. And the people can afford it, they'll just keep buying it at this price. If they can't afford it, then suppliers will lower the price down. But if they lower the price down, there are going to be less suppliers in the market. And that's why the market is designed in such a way that whatever people pay for, there are going to be more suppliers, for example. And whatever people don't pay for, there are going to be less suppliers, and those products are going to disappear from the market. Now take an example of BlackBerry and iPhone. At some point there was a huge demand for BlackBerry, and then iPhone came in, and iPhone was a superior product over the BlackBerry. And suddenly the demand for iPhone rose and the demand for BlackBerry dropped significantly, and that's why BlackBerry stopped producing their phones and iPhone became basically the icon of the smartphones. That's how the market overall works. And that's why if you take a look at the grocery stores in the United States, you will realize that overall, they're actually making a profit margin of 1 to 3%. What does that mean? So a grocery store right now is making, for every $100,000 of revenue that they're generating, there is probably 1,000 or maybe 2, or in best case scenario, $3,000 profit. Now, would you start that kind of a business knowing that for every $100,000, you will make just $2,000? You just made $1 million of revenue. Yes, $1 million is a lot of money and it seems like a lot, but that's because you purchased that much of inventory and you sold that much of inventory. And the money you will take back home is just $20,000. So if you actually put a price control over these grocery stores, they will run out of business. If they're making $2,000 for every $100,000, and now because of your policy, they will make like what? $500 for every $100,000 they make? Do you think there will be an incentive for them to continue doing that business? What do you think the owner of that corner shop in that neighborhood is going to do? He will simply close down his store, and that's pretty much about it. Yes, bread, for example, is no longer sold for more than, let's say, for more than $2. Yes, that's the price around the country. But guess what? That shop that used to sell that bread in that neighborhood is no longer available. They closed down their business because it no longer makes economic sense for them to continue selling that bread or continue selling groceries. And that's why historically price controls never actually work. But that leads us to ask ourselves a very simple question. How do you bring prices down? There should be a way for us to control prices in such a way or manipulate the market in such a way where prices won't get out of control just like they are right now. And in order to answer that question, in order to solve that problem, we have to be a little bit more strategic with our thinking. If we want to kind of solve a problem, we have to go to the roots of that problem and find out what were the reasons that we had low prices before this problem actually happened. So maybe if we go to the source and we solve and fix the source of that problem, we will have lower prices maybe. Wouldn't that be a smart thing to do instead of actually looking at the outcome and trying to fix every outcome of it? Because if we actually do that, we'll never solve the problem. But if we'll get to the root of the problem and we solve the root of the problem, then prices will naturally calm down. So let's try to do that in the first place. Now, to do that, we have to take a look at the historical context for a moment and the reasons why prices were low for all of those years before the pandemic, or I would say before 2022 even, for all of those years. See, what happened historically is that after World War II, United States was this superpower. And the rest of the world, Europe was super rich before World War II and even before World War I, but now it's basically destroyed. But China is also destroyed, Russia is destroyed, Japan is destroyed, and Africa was pretty much poor at that time, and Middle East is pretty much poor as well. So that's the world we have at this point, and the United States, let me just change the color for the United States. United States is the only or the richest country in the world, the richest, let's call it like that. And the United States starts selling technology to the rest of the world for super expensive prices that nobody else has. They have F-16s, they have the super high tech, and the United States is literally just controlling the world at this point, you can say. And in return, all these countries, what they're doing is that they're producing a lot of products for a very cheap price and exporting it to the United States. And that's why there's so many cheap products in the United States at this point. But what you have to understand in this equation is that, especially back in 1980s, China makes a very good decisions. They open up themselves. Let me change that for a second. Now let's go back. What happens is that in 1980s, China makes a very historic decisions. They open up to the world and they decide to become the factory of the world. So at that point, a lot of US companies start shifting their manufacturing to China. Because in China, at that point, China was pretty much one of the poorest countries in the world. And when you have such a poor country, you can pay those people a fraction of what you pay them in the United States. And suddenly the US companies started lowering their prices significantly. Why? Because now they could actually produce the exact same things in China for a fraction of the cost that they would do in the United States. And for so many years, up until recently, China was actually producing most of the things for the United States. And that's why we had so many cheap prices for all of those years. Now, besides that, something different happened. China was like, listen, we can actually produce things for ourselves as well. So make China great again. So China starts producing a lot of things here. China becomes this superpower, and China's economy literally starts growing and getting to the roof. It just starts competing with the United States. So China at that point stops becoming this country that produces just, cheap products. China suddenly starts producing high tech. China suddenly starts producing technology that is equal to the United States. China suddenly becomes a competitor of the United States. And now United States is like, wait a second, you can produce the exact same thing that we are producing in the United States for a fraction of the price? What do you think is going to happen to the US companies? Imagine you have two cars, two very identical cars. Now, let me put it differently. Imagine you have a car that is a US car that is superior to the Chinese car, but the difference in technology and the quality is very limited, is very small. But the difference in price is massive. The Chinese car is half the price of the American car. Which car are you going to choose? Most people are going to go and choose the cheaper car, especially the middle class, especially the poor people. And that's why US companies started being afraid at this point, and that's why United States did something that literally changed everything. What made prices so low in the first place was globalization and the US superiority. United States was at the top, and globalization started spreading across the globe. And because we had this, that every country started producing whatever it's best at, and it started reducing the prices. Vietnam was best at producing X, Y, and Z, for example. That country was best at producing smartphones. This country is best at agriculture. And this globalization started driving prices down and down and down. And because the United States was literally the most advanced technologically country in the world, United States was not worried about anybody, because United States has the best technology in the world. And that's why if you take a look at the numbers, you'll find out that for all of those years, United States was consuming 25% of all of the resources of the world, while it was actually paying 5% of the global population. So for the last, you can say 50 years, United States was at the top. United States was actually consuming all the resources in the world. But when that shift actually happened, when the change actually happened, when the rest of the world started catching up with the United States, guess what happened? United States started to worry, because we got headlines. I remember back in 2012 and 2015, the world was like, there is going to be a point when China is going to overtake the United States. And if you take a look at this graph, you will realize that the GDP of China every single year started growing. And according to this graph, you could actually say that China by 2030 is going to overtake the United States as the largest economy in the world. And as time goes by, the difference between these two economies is going to be massive. This is China. Let me change that for a second. This is China and this is the US. So do you think the United States is happy? Do you think the United States wants to see something like that? Of course not. United States is like, if we actually use our economic advantage at this point, we're going to use our status in the world as the largest economy in the world and the most powerful economy in the world. But in order to beat China, there are two possible solutions. The first solution is that US companies should get creative. US companies should become more competitive. US companies should should innovate to the point where they can actually produce the exact same products at a fraction of the price that Chinese companies can do at this point. So that's how they can actually compete with China. Or, for example, United States can actually build technology that is far, far superior than China or any other country in the world can do that. That is one option. So if the United States is going to do that, prices are going to go down. Why? Because suddenly the United States came out with a technology that helped to reduce prices of certain products or certain technology. Or there is a second option. So first option is work hard, and that option is very difficult. But if you don't want to take that option, you have second option, and that option is called war. When you think about war, war isn't just about shooting from your AK-47. War isn't just about throwing nuclear weapons. War isn't just about sending soldiers to the ground. War can be economic. And any kind of war usually starts with an economic war. So if you win the economic war, you can actually win any kind of war. And in 2016, when Trump gets elected, what happens is that he starts a trade war with China. So if you remember back in the days, United States starts a trade war with China at this point. Up until that point, the economic relationships between the two countries were pretty amazing. Now, of course, some people are going to claim that China was actually violating some laws, it was actually manipulating its currency, and it was doing a lot of unethical things, for example. But if we're going to be honest with each other, United States is also not really perfect. United States is violating the rules in a completely different way. It's basically a war between empires. It's a war between the dominance of the world. It's a war about who's going to get to the top of the mountains. Yes, the US has been there since World War II, but it's not enough just to get to the top. You will be overthrown by the rivals. And that's why United States suddenly started this trade war with China by imposing tariffs on Chinese products. For example, United States imposed a 30% tariff on solar panels. A tariff is basically a tax that you impose on foreign goods and services. For example, if you bring a solar panel from China to the United States, let's say you actually buy it for $100, or no, let's say you buy it for $80 and you bring it to the United States and you want to sell it for $100, but you can't sell it for $100 because there is a 30% tax, so you're going to include the 30% and now it's going to cost $130, for example. Suddenly, the price has artificially increased because the government imposed a tariff on that. And if you look at the list, there are a lot of things, for example, but I've included some of them. There was a 50% tariff on washing machines. Yes, suddenly the price of washing machines that you bring from China increased by 50%. Do you think that's the fault of Chinese? Of course not. That is the tariff that the United States imposed on washing machines that you bring from China. A 25% on steel, a 10% on aluminium, a 25% on EVs. So imagine for a moment that you want to buy a car, which is something absolutely normal to do, and you want to buy an electric car. You take a look at Tesla, and the cheapest Tesla is probably like what? $40,000. But the cheapest Chinese electrical car that rivals Tesla is like $20,000. If you're rich and you don't have a financial problem and you can afford it, you go and buy the $40,000 Tesla, which is a better quality than a Chinese electrical car. But let's say hypothetically that you can't afford a $40,000 Tesla. You are going to go and buy what? A Chinese car, a Chinese electrical car. But now it's not going to cost $20,000. There is going to be a 25% increase because the government simply artificially made the price of that Chinese car more expensive in order to incentivize you not to buy them, but buy American products at this point. And starting from 2024, that tax has increased to 100% at this point. Guess what that means? Yes, that car costs $20,000 that you bring from China. Suddenly in the United States, you have to increase it by at least $100,000. So would you buy a Tesla or a Chinese car that also costs $40,000? Its real price is $20,000, but the government has artificially increased its price so that you choose an American car and not a Chinese car. And that's what a trade war is in the first place. So if you are wondering why prices have increased, then prices supposed to increase when you have a trade war and you impose tariffs on foreign goods. And these are just like some examples that I'm talking about here. If you look at it, the list of tariffs that the United States imposes is very, very long. And I can't really go and tell you about all of them, but if you actually Google them, you will find them out. Now, the second reason why prices have increased is because we had a pandemic. For like 40 years or 50 years, or I would say since World War II, we have built this global supply chains because of globalization. And the system was running for so many years and it was super effective. And that efficiency have lowered prices down to the bare minimum. And then because of the pandemic, what happened is that those systems stopped working for a while. And when a system was working, if you want to kind of push it again and restart it, it is going to be very expensive. So the pandemic literally drove prices higher because the cost of those supply chains became more expensive. But some people might say that, wait a second, I don't remember that prices didn't rise in 2020 or 2021. Yes, a lot of suppliers or businesses, I would say so, they've actually operated at a loss to a certain extent because they did not want to shut down their prices or their companies, I would say so, because we had a pandemic, because people were sitting in their homes and their income was very, very limited. They're like, we will operate at a loss for a year or two when we're getting out of this crisis, and then we will adjust our prices according to the market. And that's exactly what they did. So if you're actually wondering why prices are high, these are your reasons. We had the pandemic. Of course, this can be fixed over time, but even if we do that, we have a price war. And guess what's gonna happen now? We have new tariffs that they have actually imposed on Chinese products. So as I told you, electric cars, the tariff on them is going to rise to 100%. We have semiconductors. Every single technology at this point you have has a semiconductor, a chip. So if you bring a cheaper chip from China to put it in your technology, now the tax on that is going to increase by 50%. So any product you buy will increase by another 25% if you actually bring that from China. The entire point of globalization is like, you see, country A produces, for example, something at a cheaper price because they have specialized, let's say, in steel. And company or a country B, for example, they specialize in agriculture. So if each of these countries basically do the best what they do, they can lower their prices and then exchange the goods they actually produce with each other. But because each of them actually does one thing and focuses on being the best at one thing, they can actually reduce their prices by using economies of scale. So if China, for example, does something better than the United States, like for example, EVs, China is the largest EV manufacturer in the world, and they can actually produce electrical cars at a fraction that the United States can. If they start selling without any kind of tariffs, Chinese EVs in the United States, guess what is going to happen to the US companies? Now, US companies have two options. Either they will innovate in order to compete with these Chinese companies, or they will just go out of business. So it's in your best interest for the United States to lift those tariffs because you as a consumer will have a choice. Those companies will compete for your attention. But that's not what corporations want, of course. So they will lobby for tariffs against Chinese products and goods so that Chinese products in the United States will be more expensive, and you will think like, wait a second, I would rather buy an American car than a Chinese car when the prices are the same. But the prices are the same because it's artificially done by the government and not because in reality they are the same. So they want to increase solar cells, for example, by another 25%. Even needles, they want to increase the tax on them by 50%. So if a needle, for example, costs $1 from China, now it is going to cost $1.50. Why did the price increase? Because of the tariffs. Steel, lithium-ion batteries, they will impose taxes up to 25%. Now think about that for a moment. China is the largest producer of batteries in the world because they have actually spent the last 30 years being the best at batteries in the world. And that's why they can actually produce them at a much smaller price than the United States. Now, the United States can buy those cheaper batteries from China and reduce the prices. But the United States is like, no, we're not going to buy from China. In fact, if you bring cheaper batteries from China, we're going to tax you 25%. So what do you think are going to happen to US electrical cars that buy Chinese batteries to put in their cars? Their prices will increase. Do you see where the problem actually is? Do you see how the US government, because it's not capable at this point to keep competing with China, and instead of actually letting the free market do its job and the US companies to compete with Chinese companies, it's actually just restricting Chinese cheaper products to come into the United States to save US corporations. And the list is very long, and I've actually taken this chart from Visual Capitalist. I just want to give them credit for this little chart they've actually created. Of course, there is a long list of other products as well where they're actually increasing the tariffs by at least 25%. So do you see what's happening over here is that these are the reasons that are actually causing prices to rise in the first place. So if you want lower prices, what you have to do is that you need a free market where all companies are going to compete with each other. Of course, you can actually say that we're at a trade war with China and we have to win this war. Well, if you're in a war and you want to win this war, then don't complain about prices. Prices are going to rise because we are in an economic war over here. So corporations, of course, love what's happening over here, because all of these tariffs are actually protecting their interests, protecting their products. But with this protectionism economy that we have at this point, there is no way we can actually win. There is no way we can actually lower down prices, because competition is the best for consumers. Competition is what makes prices, is what brings prices actually down. So all of this talk about prices going up and we're going to control prices in order to help the average American, an absolute lie. It's not going to work. It has never worked in the history, and I've explained to you right now why exactly. So this plan that Kamala Harris campaign has about the economy and taxation literally does not make sense at all. Yes, on paper it looks very nice. When a politician gets on the stage and starts shouting loudly, we will bring prices down by signing a law or a policy that will control prices. It sounds perfect, it sounds really great, it sounds motivational, but in reality, it doesn't actually work. In fact, this plan destroys the United States. I don't really know whether she will be elected or not, but if she gets elected, this is exactly what you're getting. So if you want actually to protect yourself, you have to actually invest on your own. You have to educate yourself first, and then you have to get and buy assets, because nobody is going to take care of you, least the government. Start investing, get into the stock market, start buying assets, and if you need help with that, check the first link in the description. Take care.